Good day, everybody. This is Randy Franklin Smith, and welcome to today's webinar, 5 real-world ways to use anomaly detection with security logs. Go to the next slide. Today's webinar is brought to you by Event Tracker, and Isaac, nice to have you with us today.
Thank you, Randy. Hello, everybody.
Now, the stuff that we're going to be talking about today and the methods of anomaly detection, isn't our usual fare where we'll be performing certain actions in Windows or whatever and then going and finding those events in the security log. Today we're talking about, looking for patterns of events, and it really takes more than just an event viewer to make this happen. So that's why I've teamed up with Isaac today and had them sponsor today's webinar because Event Tracker can do this, can perform these scenarios of anomaly detection that we're talking about. So what we're going to ask Isaac to do is, for each example that I bring forth and present to you for how we could use these feasible methods of anomaly detection, we're going to ask Isaac to briefly demonstrate what that might look like, if we're actually doing it. And we'll stay away from, a big sales pitch on Event Tracker, but we've got to use some kind of tool for to demonstrate what we're talking about. And then after my presentation, then Isaac will take over as with the usual sponsor presentation and show you more about Event Tracker. So now let's look at our preview of key points. Okay, so I've divided today's session into 3 parts here. First of all, we're going to go over what we've come up with as feasible methods of anomaly detection. Key in on the word feasible there because, as I discussed in the abstract and the promotion for this event, there's all these different theoretical pattern analysis, pattern matching techniques that they use in basically movies and spy novels to detect behavior like this, or maybe if you have unlimited computing power like Homeland Security. But we're talking about what is feasible in the real world. So we've got 2 methods that we're going to show you. We're going to discuss the context required in order to detect those anomalies, and then we're going to show you at least, probably more, 5 actual examples of where we'd use these anomaly detection techniques, and then we'll even share some anecdotes of where this has worked in the real world and actually caught bad guy stuff. So let's talk about the 2 methods of anomaly detection that we're going to be using today here on the next slide. All right, so basically we're talking about seeing something new in the log, or seeing something either much higher or much lower than normal in terms of quantity. All right, so for instance, with something new, what if Bob normally runs programs A, B, and C, but today he runs program X for the first time? That's what we mean by something new. On the other hand, what would be the other? Well, let's say Bob usually causes about 100 object access events per day. That's the baseline that we've come up with. Today, that suddenly doubles. Okay, so that's something either much higher or much lower than normal. Those are the 2 simple, feasible methods of anomaly detection that we're going to talk today about. Now, folks, please use your Q&A feature. I always say this, but we really like to hear your thoughts, and we want your questions. If you've got tips or methods that you use, please share all of that stuff. Any kind of feedback you have, and where appropriate, I'll work that into today's presentation. Okay, now let's go forward to our next slide here. So in order to capture these anomalies, then we need some combination of criteria where we're looking at either, well, first of all, let's talk about event IDs. Typically, we're going to just specify some class of events, maybe all object access events, or all logon failures, or all process start events. Okay, so some set of events, and of course this doesn't have to be just Windows, right? In fact, we'll even talk about some of these anomaly scenarios outside of just Windows, Unix, and so on. But anyway, we start out by specifying what set of events do we want to track, and then perhaps we're also going to track separate numbers or separate lists of our baseline for different users or maybe different computers. So, with the two scenarios I showed you before, we're talking about tracking, the combination of a certain event for a certain user, and either keeping up with a list of what is normal to see as far as the process name with that first scenario, or we're just looking at the gross quantity for that user and that set of events. Now, if that's not real clear, it will become clearer when we get into our examples, because we're going to be identifying exactly what our context is for each one of these. Some folks, instead of using the word context, might use the word criteria as far as what creates one of these counters or baseline lists. All right, let's see what we got next. So how do we get that baseline? If we're talking about something new, well, we have to have a list of what's normal. Like with the example of Bob, we said Bob normally runs program A, B, and C. Well, that's our baseline list right there. For Bob, the list is programs A, B, and C. How do we get that list for each user, or even enterprise-wide? Sometimes you want your baseline to be broader for the whole enterprise. Well, certainly, we could do manual research and definition. What we'd have to do in the new process scenario is we'd have to go out there and do some queries to get a distinct list of all executables in our process start events, which incidentally is event ID 592 on Windows 2003. Add 4096 to that for your other systems. But wouldn't it be nice if we could just do automatic learning, if your log management solution could do that? Well, that's certainly the future, and that is something that, as you'll see, our sponsor today can do, and we'll let Isaac point that out in his presentation. But basically, that's what it is. You either manually research it yourself and come up with your baseline. Now, sometimes your baseline would not be a list of distinct, data items like process names. Sometimes it would just be a quantity, saying, okay, we normally see 500, user activity events for Bob in a given day's time. And so now, if it's user-specific, then that means that you would have to be doing that analysis for each user. And then what about when new users come along? So as you can see, even with the feasible scenarios that we're coming up with, there's potentially a lot of work in building your baseline. And then what about keeping the baseline up to date? Because things change over time. So are we saying that you'll have to statically redo this every once in a while? Or preferably what we'd like to see is our SIM log management analysis engine to be able to, on a rolling basis, re-baseline all the time, or keep that baseline up to date. Maybe we would say something like, let's average out the daily numbers for these different criteria on a rolling 7 days. So your baseline is always going to reflect your most recent 7 days. That would be most ideal, right? Now, how do you compare against that baseline? Well, for new anomaly scenarios, like the first time Bob runs program X, we need the ability to compare against potentially large lists. Because think about it. Bob may execute a lot of different programs in a given day's time, or maybe we're doing this new process tracking on the entire enterprise, not just on a user by user basis. We're just saying, hey, whenever we see a new executable show up anywhere in our environment, we want to know right away. So think about all the executables, exe names basically, exe files on every computer on your whole network. That could be a pretty long list. And what we're saying is in your alert criteria, you need the ability to compare a value in the 592 event to this long list of what we consider to be baseline normal processes. For high and low anomalies, you need the ability to count events and set alert thresholds, basically saying, okay, here's the event that I'm looking for, but and it's not just an event ID, right? It would be this event for this user or this event for any user, but we only want to know when that event's been logged X number of times for that user. Or it might not just be one event ID, it might be, okay, I want to total up all the times that any event in this set of event IDs is logged for any given user, and then alert me when it exceeds this amount. So this may, if you have the basic alert threshold technology that a lot of log management solutions have, this might work. But if, it depends on how granular you're trying to make your anomaly detection. If you're trying to make it on a user-by-user basis, then it may not be that feasible to define this. So, ideally then, we're going to have maybe something more than just your normal alert criteria available for detecting these anomalies. And I think, Isaac, this is an example of kind of purpose-built functionality that you guys had to build into this, right, in order to make these kind of scenarios happen.
That's correct.
All right, so you're going to see examples of what we're actually talking about here in just a second. We'll get out of the theoretical in a moment. Here's a couple comments from folks. Let's see here. Michael says, I always worry about automatic learning for any type of baseline. If there are problems in your current environment, your baseline might start out dangerously inaccurate. The same problem occurs with whitelisting baselines. If there is malware or nefarious activity during your baseline creation, you wouldn't necessarily catch it until much later. So I go along with that in principle, but it comes down to what do we have the resources for in the real world? Ideally, yes. I mean, the nicest thing to do would be to have a purely clean environment network where everything is a known clean state. Create our baseline from that. But then, how are you going to keep it up to date? I mean, there's very few enterprises that could afford to, run analysis every day to figure out, okay, do we have any new executables that are whitelisted? Let's put them on there. So, at the end of the day, like I always say, we're in business to do business, not to be secure, right? We have to be secure enough. So I think for a lot of organizations, an automatic learning rolling baseline is going to do the job. But if you have ways to come up with a clean baseline and then go from there, that's definitely better security. But it really depends a lot on your environment, what you have in terms of resources. I tell you, a lot of folks out there, they're doing good just to get a log management solution and get it installed, and they need it to do as much as it can without a huge amount of configuration, because they just don't have the time to do what's ideal. So that's where I think we have a place for this automatic learning and automatic baseline creation. Let's see here. Now we'll come back to some of your other thoughts, like from Robert and Christy here in just a little bit. Let's go to our next slide there, Isaac. So just a few other points where we dive down into these examples, and that is, anomalies, that's what we're talking about today. Anomalies are not always indicative of a security event, but they're always indicative of something, right? Because something caused that anomaly to jump up. And it may very well be legitimate. It may be an operational problem, or it may be a security issue. And of course, this anomaly detection, these two feasible, simple methods that we're using today, they're not going to catch all security issues out there, right? It's part of your whole defense in depth. But as you're going to see, they are going to catch some real-world things that you would want to know about. So let's go to example 1. Okay, this is the one I've been talking about, a new process. Now, some of you may think, well, I would like to track this on a user-by-user basis. Other folks might want to track on an enterprise-wide basis. What am I saying here? Well, if we're talking about Windows, first of all, we're talking about event ID 592 on Windows Server 2003, and then on Windows Server 2008, we need to add 4096 to that to get the event ID there, and I'll tell you what that is here
4688.
In a second. 4688. Thanks a lot. Okay, so we're saying let's look at all of our 592s and 4688s, and let's pull the new process ID, not the process ID, sorry, the executable name. Let's pull the executable name out of there and compare it to a baseline of clean or at least known executables. Now, do we make that list specific to each individual user, or do we make it specific to the enterprise? There's pros and cons either way, and in fact you may want to do it both ways. If you do it across the enterprise, the advantage is as soon as there's a new executable that you've never seen before, you're going to know about it, and the resources it'll take to do that are going to be fairly small because we're just talking about one list of executables for your whole enterprise. What would be the benefit of dropping this down more and making it more granular and keeping a different list of known executables for each individual user? Well, the advantage there would be that maybe this is a known executable. There's nothing wrong with seeing it in the enterprise per se, but it's a new behavior for that particular user. You see the difference? So, and really we're probably talking about different risk or threat scenarios altogether. If we're keeping one list for the whole enterprise, then we're basically looking to detect unauthorized software or some type of new malware the first time it executes. If we're watching this on a user-by-user basis, we'd probably get that, but we would also be looking to see some new behavior that this user is doing, something that they've never done before. So Isaac, can you show us something on this and tell us the way that you specifically have implemented this example? Because you know there's variations on a theme, right?
Yeah, there is. Let me get logged in here. All right, so I'm going to open up the event tracker here, and I want to jump over to our behavior analysis piece. There are several other components that we'll talk about a little bit later, but we'll drill down directly into the behavior, and you can get to that either through the security or operations sections, depending on which hat you're wearing when you first come in. Oh, my session timed out, so let me get logged back in there.
While you're logging in, let me address a question from Joe, and that is, he says, would we have to capture the event logs of end-user workstations to determine 592.4688? In other words, if a local user kicks off a program on their workstation, would the event be written to their local log or a server? So the answer, Joe, is yes, you've got to be monitoring your workstation security logs in order to get this. Back to you, Isaac.
All right. So here, some of the different anomalies that we're going to be talking about today, of course, will be admin activities, some IPs. We jump over to the operations side so we can look at those processes that we were talking about in this last slide. So we want to know any type of new process or anything that's out of the ordinary. So what I've set up here out of the box, we're looking for enterprise-wide. We're not looking at it at a per user basis. If you need that set up, you have the ability to go in and create your own rule sets for this behavior analysis and define down to that level if you need to. So here we get a pretty quick picture of what's happening in the environment as far as all the different processes. We can then drill down to get more specifics. And what this allows me to see is that on any given day, what we should be having as far as the events, which events we're seeing today, how many times they've occurred. And then Event Tracker goes through and has a 7-day learning period out of the box. If you need to adjust that, you can do that as well. And then it goes through and it learns what is normal for your environment. We don't predefine any list because what is normal in our environment may not be normal in your environment. So we'll watch that, and then if anything new occurs outside after that learning period is over, and this is a 7-day moving average, we'll let you know that new activity has occurred. So you can see down here at the bottom right some of these new activities that have been occurring today, and when these type of activities happen, Event Tracker can alert you to that via emails, updating on our incidents page. When you first log into Event Tracker, you can update RSS feeds, however type of notifications you want. And then we'll learn over that 7-day period what is normal for that application or for that process. And so we know, for example, that SendTrap in the past has had, on an average, of about 6 occurrences on a given day. Then for some reason yesterday it jumped up to over 8,000. So we've got something we need to go take a look at. We can be alerted to this. We can run reports and do some analysis to figure out where that's happening. I can click here and go out and do a log search. This will take us back into our archives to figure out where this is occurring, on which machines is this anomaly. If it's an executable or a process you've never seen before, you can go to What's This? This will take you out to processlibrary.com, give you more information about what is this executable or this particular application. We actually used this in our environment to catch a Trojan about 1.5 years ago. We got alerted that a new process had kicked off, and it was called 0.exe. As soon as it occurred, I came back in here to Event Tracker, saw the machine that it was launched on. We immediately got that machine off the network because we did a whois lookup, found that it was one of the new banking Trojans. And so we got that machine off the network, and then we started to do some forensics here through Event Tracker to track down exactly how did this executable get on the machine, why didn't our antivirus pick it up, and what we discovered was it came down through a website, and the reason that our antivirus didn't pick it up was that the night before when it tried to do its updates for its DAT files, it hung and didn't update, and the service was still running, but the actual antivirus software itself was sitting in a hung state. So we were able to correct a couple of issues very quickly and get that resolved before that 0.exe was able to go out and do any damage.
Perfect example of what we're talking about there. And while we're here talking about processes, can we edit the list of, can we edit the baseline? We had that discussion, and I should bring this up, that who was it that Joe had, I think, said that there's dangers to just having an automatic baseline. So I think it is useful to mention that an added feature, if your solution does allow you to automatically create your baseline, you should be able to go in later and edit that if you want to, right? Redact portions of it.
Correct. We have the ability to do some filtering, and you can go in and edit those thresholds and go in and edit and pull out. So I know, for example, that SendTrap.exe, that's something we use in our testing to simulate scenarios and to do some product testing. So I know that I should see this in my lab systems, but I should not see that in my production environment. So in my lab systems, I would go in and actually filter out SendTrap.exe because I don't want to see it. But on my production system, if that SIM trap shows up, I want to know about it. So you can go in there and edit and set up filter list and adjust those thresholds and what you're tracking.
Now, Greg has a couple questions. They pertain to Event Tracker. I'm going to go ahead and ask them, though, because they pertain right to the subject we're talking about of detecting anomalies with the processes that are showing up. And I think these will be useful to us, even if we're just interested in learning about these scenarios. So Greg asks, can you maintain, or does Event Tracker maintain a list of known hazardous executables? And I mean, I don't know, that may be something you guys do, Isaac, but really that's kind of opposite of what we're trying to accomplish today, and that is we're trying to detect anomalies, and we're trying to make our anomalies fit a baseline that is custom to each person's environment. So it would be possible, though, right, to create a list of known executables, but again, that becomes very reactive. It's very much like, signature-based antivirus detection. But I suppose you could do it, right, Eric? I mean,
yes, we can do that. And actually, one of the other components that we have within Event Tracker, we have that ability to set up those lists and look for what is known good versus, doing that whitelisting and that blacklisting, and there are some items already in there. I always tell people, be careful, just automatically whitelisting things. A lot of these new Trojans and malwares, if I see it on my machine, it may come through with the name of, ABC123. That same thing infects you, and it may come through on your machine as DEF789. So you have to be careful when you start setting those up and thinking that is just the pure list. Anything else is good.
All right, good points. And then finally, Robert says, Isaac, did Event Tracker pull that errant PC offline? I don't think you guys had it set up to do that, right?
No, I didn't have it set up to do that, but that is something that we can do through our alert mechanism called our remediation actions, where I can actually set it up to do that. It just so happened to turn out that machine was about 3 offices down from where I sit, so I just walked over and told the lady, go take a break. I'm going to unplug your machine while we do some forensics on what's happening and stop a Trojan.
Cool. All right, so that's one scenario there, folks. New process we've never seen before, and there you've got a real-world example of where it caught a true security issue and allowed them to respond to it very quickly. Let's see what our next example is.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's move away from the something we've never seen before scenario, and let's talk about the quantity-based scenario where a certain parameter comes in, a certain quantity comes in either much higher or much lower than what it would normally be. In most of these cases, we're going to be talking about where the counter is, much higher than normal, but there could be situations where you'd want the opposite too. But especially for security issues, it's going to be when it's higher. So let's talk about user activity. And here what we're talking about is for our set of events, let's just include any event ID that would be typical to normal end user activity. Stuff like object access events. This file was opened, file's closed, a program was executed, user logged on, they logged off. All right, those are all normal end user activities. And we're not excluding those same events from being analyzed some other way. We're just saying, let's take a class of events that indicate nothing other than what would be normal end user activity. Then let's track that class of events individually for each user and come up with a baseline of how many of these events we typically see for each user. So for Bob, maybe we're looking at the past 7 days activity, and our average says, Bob should normally, cause 3,000 end user activity events in a given day's time. So if that suddenly jumps up to 6,000, then let's wave a flag and follow up on that. And in this case, we'd be looking at all computers. We wouldn't be also slicing this down and dicing it at the computer level. So we'd just be looking at all of Bob's activity across the whole network, and not just Bob's, but Alice's and everybody else's. Isaac, you've got something like that set up, right?
Yes, we do. I'll jump back over there. So we'll go back over and we'll go back into our behavior section here. Let me jump over to operations. What's nice with the event tracker is you can move these panels around. You can add more panels. If you want to see more on your operation side or more on your security side, you can add and remove as you need to on a per user basis. So here, once again, we're looking at our user activities. We'll drill down. We can see by simply clicking on the user over here on the left-hand side, we can see those activities related to that user up here at the top. And then, of course, if there's anything new or out of the ordinary, we want to know. And so looking at this, the service admin account here has 174 log-on failures. And that account normally has 21 occurrences. Now all of a sudden it's jumped up to 171. I want to go out and figure out, why is this account all of a sudden, it's a service account. It should have a set amount of activities in a given day. Now all of a sudden it's jumped up there. So and I'll do a log search, see if we can track down, figure out what's causing the service account to have these unusual activities. And this can be for a user, for a service account, whatever it may be. And these can be events, that we're collecting from the servers. They can be things that we're collecting from workstations. It depends on how granular you want to get with your collection as to what we'll bring back for you. So here we can see that on these log-on failures, it's showing that the user's not being granted the requested type of login, and this one is a login type 4. And of course, Randy, you and I have done webinars before. We've talked about these log-on types. This one happens to be batch. So somebody has set up this service account on this machine, workstation 5, to do some type of batch or scheduled task, and they didn't give this account those log-on rights. So we can go in, take that corrective action before people start complaining that they're having problems with an application or something's not working on their machine.
Awesome. All right, let's look at example number 3. Okay, here we're kind of talking about something similar, but instead of end user activity, admin activity. Now, what events would qualify as admin activity? Basically, it would be all account management events. If you look in my Windows Security Log Encyclopedia, you'll see, that's create a user account, add a member to a group, create a group, create, change, delete users, groups, computer accounts, and so on. And that's all part of one category, account management events. They're all like, they all begin in the 600 range. Now there's other events besides that too. Now one caveat here, some of these events, they're called account management events, but they are actually performed by the end user on his or her own account. For instance, when you change your password, now, we're not talking about when the help desk goes in and resets somebody's password when it's been forgotten. We're just saying when you change your password, on a regular basis, that does show up as an account management event. So we'd want to filter things like that out. But here we're saying let's track for each user how many admin type events are normally caused by that user on a daily basis. And then when we see that exceed what would be normal, that could be indicative of a couple things. In fact, there's 2 or 3 scenarios. One scenario would be we have a malicious admin, an admin who's gone rogue, and he's going out there and just deleting gobs of user accounts. I mean, we see stuff like that happen, right, Isaac?
Yes, and that's one of the things I get asked quite a bit is, we think we have a rogue admin. Can you help us track it down? And it's something that we can actually do fairly quickly and point them out who it is, where they're coming from, things of that nature.
And then let's see here. Another scenario would be that somebody has inadvertently been given admin authority, or it could be that a bad guy program has gotten in there, created a backdoor account, and now that backdoor account is active and is performing admin level actions. So show us what this would look like, Isaac.
Okay. So what I'll do, I'll just go right up here to the behavior and hit this drop-down list. This allows me to go ahead and flip between the other predefined behavior analysis or any of the behavior analysis that you define, jump between them fairly quickly. So we'll jump over here and look at the admin activities. And then we see we've got some activities here from Betty, from Jay Carter, from myself. We look for things that are new. So all of a sudden we have some new activities from Jay Carter. And then we have some out-of-the-ordinary activities from Betty. She normally has 3,500 roughly events on any given day. Now all of a sudden she's up to 9,100. What's going on? Is there, does she have an automated process set up for creating and adjusting some accounts, putting them in different groups? Maybe we can go in and do our log search on that, track down exactly what she's doing. We can always click on her name up here at the top, and then that'll show us the different type of activities that are occurring for her. The one that I always tell people to watch out for, besides the out of the ordinary, is this new admin activity. So all of a sudden we have something here new for Jay Carter. So let's go do a log search and find out, what they've been doing. Is this a domain account? Is this a local account? If this is not somebody that we know, is a member of our admin team, how do they get admin rights? Did somebody put them in a group accidentally? Is this a user that keeps complaining that, I need to be able to install software. I need to be able to do other things. And instead of going in and giving them just the permissions they need, sometimes admins will just throw these users into their local admin group and just be done with them. So we can go in and track that type of information as well. So here we can see, Jay Carter is going in and creating some accounts, setting up some users, setting passwords. We can go in and look at these. We can refine them down here. So if we don't want to look at all the different events one by one, I want to see just the account creates here. So let's just refine this down. So they have our Jay Carter account here. And what are they doing? They created two accounts, a Jay Papa and a Jay Kennedy. And we want to track and find, all right, how did this person get these admin rights? So let's go back out and let's do a new search. Instead of just looking for Jay Carter admin activities, let's go over to our advanced here and let's just look for Jay Carter and see if we can track down who created that account, when they created it. I'll roll this search back for a couple of hours and hit search. So now we're going to go out, look through the archives and find out, when did this user get these admin rights, who would have done it. You may have to go back to longer time periods to go out and actually find it. Some of the things that I found is that these rogue admins, they'll create these accounts and then they'll sit on them for a month or two before they actually start doing anything with them. So we'll refine this down and we'll look for the 624s again. Hit refine. And so here we see that Jay Kennedy or Jay Carter is creating the accounts. What I'm looking for though is when Jay Carter is in that new account, and then we look right here for the caller username and see that it was Isaac. So I created this account. I can go in and start looking, was this user, did I add them to a local admin group, and start tracking things back from that perspective.
That's a nice example of how we would take, the anomaly detection to raise the flag, and then we're going to have to research those events and correlate them back to figure out what led up to this. So that nice track back there, Isaac.
Right. And what's also nice is, when I find this data, I can simply hit my export icon up here, and I've already got a report.
All right, great. Let's see our next example. Okay, and so this is the third one on a theme, and this is high or low system activity. So here we're tracking across all users. We're not looking at individual users. And we're just saying, let's take all events too. So all events triggered by all users, but let's just count the number of events. Now this sounds absurdly simple, but it's very interesting what you get. Let's just count all events for each computer. And we're not differentiating or limiting which event IDs are kept. We're just looking for a computer that suddenly starts generating a lot more events than what it normally does. What kind of scenarios have you seen this help with, Isaac?
I've seen it help with detecting a hard drive crash and people actually being able to save data, because all of a sudden that system will be spitting out, its normal, like a workstation, a couple hundred events a day, and all of a sudden it'll throw out one or two hard drive errors, and then within a day or two, depending on the usage of the machine, it may spike to several thousand of these hard drive errors spewing out. We actually were able to save a laptop and save several years worth of sales data for a guy when that happened to him about 4 years ago. I've also seen it help out to detect that somebody's changed some type of group policy. They've either added policy, they've turned policy off, trying to cover their tracks, or help you detect, a particular firewall or Unix or Linux machine that may be getting hit by some type of malware or somebody trying to hack it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We're not talking about just Windows systems, especially with this one, because this one's so easy to do. So this would apply to any other device or Unix system that you've got there. So basically any device or computer that goes nuts in generating a lot more events than normal is going to trip this wire. So you see, folks, how the stuff we're talking about today, the scenarios we're talking about today, for the most part, it's not where we have specific bad guy scenarios where we've preconceived what might be happening and we're looking for that to happen. Instead, we're trying to say, look, let's go very, very generalized, and whenever we see something unusual or new, let's wave a flag, and then it really will be up to the admin or the security person to get in there and figure out, well, what is this? But at least the flag was raised, and oftentimes the flag's going to get raised and waved a lot sooner than what it would normally be. Let's go to example 5, though, in the interest of time, Isaac.
Okay.
All right. Now, I guess this one is different than what I was just saying. Here, maybe we do kind of have a specific bad guy scenario, but here I'm real interested in the fact that it's above what would be normal and the ability to keep a baseline going. So here we're looking for when a user suddenly is possibly copying a lot more data than what they normally would be, or instead, okay, let me be careful here. Instead of saying copying, they're reading a lot more data than normal, because as a lot of you folks already know, the security log isn't capable of telling you when somebody copies data. It's just capable of telling you when somebody's reading data. But let's say somebody is copying a whole bunch of information, all the company jewels, out to a USB drive, for instance. All right, well, that might result, if we're doing file system auditing on reads, that might result in a lot more open for read events being generated than what would be normal. And so that would be event ID 560 with read data in the event, or just add 4096 to that to get the 2008 version of the event. Or maybe we've got somebody who's malicious, just angry and ticked off, and they're going through there and just deleting. That one's a little even easier to track, because there's a specific event ID for file deletions. That's 564. Now in this case, again, remember folks, the big caveat here, if you look at the bottom of the slide, is you've got to go to these folders where you believe there's useful information, especially file server folders, and turn on file system auditing for read access and for delete permissions. And here we wouldn't be tracking this on a computer-by-computer basis, but we would be on a user-by-user basis, what's normal for a user. And in that particular case, Isaac, you thought it would be better to implement it a little differently, right?
Correct. There's a couple ways you can do this. Of course, you can use our same behavior analysis that we've been talking about. We also have our correlation engine that can help you detect these anomalies with somebody doing mass copies, mass deletes, excessive logon failures, things of that nature. And we had about 2.5 years ago, we had a customer who had this scenario where they had a mad employee getting ready to walk out. So he decided he, as his last act of, I'll show you, he was going to delete about 300 gigs worth of data. And because they had the correlation rules set up and they had the Windows Object Access Auditing turned on, Event Tracker was able to pick up and threw up that red flag for them and said, hey, you've got an excessive amount of these deletes happening, and they were able to go in and shut it down before they lost too much data, go in and track it back to see exactly which files were missing and restore those from tape. Some of the other things that we can do outside, a lot of people say they don't want to turn on Object Access Auditing on their workstations, or they don't want to push things down to the workstation as far as the audit policy. So what Event Tracker has the capability of doing, if somebody's copying data off to a USB device or to a CD or DVD, our Event Tracker agent, independent of the Microsoft Object Access Auditing, we can track that and tell you that Isaac copied the payroll.xls file over to the CD or over to the USB flash drive. So we have that ability to track those things even if you don't turn on that object access.
Nice. All right, let's go to my bottom line slide. So, remember folks, what we're talking about here is detecting anomalies. These aren't always going to be security issues when the flag gets raised. I think the part that's probably, potentially the most work is figuring out your baseline and then figuring out how to keep that baseline up to date. Now, preferably, we'd like to have a solution that can learn and create that baseline and keep it up to date. But if you don't have that, you may be able to build your own baselines, but you will still need the ability in your alerting criteria to compare against fairly large lists of data. Is this process name, is it in the list of known good? And then how big will that list be? And then also you need the ability to count events and only alert when that counter exceeds a certain defined threshold. So those are some key requirements if you're going to be doing anomaly detection. Now you've seen a little bit about how Prism has done this with Event Tracker. Let's finish up with a little bit from you, Isaac, on more about Event Tracker, and then I've got quite a few questions coming in primarily for you, Isaac,
okay,
on Event Tracker.
All right. So with the Event Tracker, we have the ability to not only collect data from the Windows side like we've been talking about today, but we can also collect information from your Unix, Linux, your syslog systems. If you have flat files like an IIS or an Apache log, we can bring that data in so that you can do some of this analysis similar to what we've done using the search mechanism. Underneath our operations and our security, we have different reports. We also have our compliance grade reports listed here, so you can come in, have those scheduled, run them on a daily, weekly basis, run them on demand. You can come in, add notes on top of these reports, so you can show management auditors that you're doing your due diligence, not only collecting all this information, but you're actually reviewing it and trying to do something with it. We also have the ability to collect information from NetFlow. We have a change audit piece, so if you want to see what's changing over time on your machines, or you want to be able to compare, we know that we have our golden system here that doesn't ever change. I want to make sure that all my other systems match that one. We can do that through our change audit through what we call the policy compares. So it allows you to track changes to your files, your folders, your registries. That also can help tie in and fill in some of those holes that Microsoft gives us, especially with that object access auditing, like what Randy said. That anytime you access a file, it's going to show up that you read it, but you also get these other list of possible things that you could do. I could write to it, I could delete it, I can synchronize, and the change audit gives me that ability to confirm that, yes, Isaac did write to this file, he appended to it, he did delete it, so it gives me that assurance. And then we also have our config assessment, so if you need to go in and make comparisons that you match some of the FTC guidelines or some of the NIST guidelines for Server 2003, Domain Controller, Gold Standard, you can go out and do those config assessments as well. I know we're getting kind of low on time. We've covered quite a bit through the actual presentation itself. If anybody has any questions, they can always reach out to us after today, and we can do a little deeper dive presentation for them.
And we do have some questions for you, Isaac. First of all, let me take one for me from Robert. How would you suggest tracking an anomaly on system access events? In other words, unwanted access attempts, when an attacker is using a variety of slaved PCs, like what you might see in a slow botnet attack. I mean, I think there you need to ignore the source IP address, right? And be zeroing in on, what is the normal number of, failed access attempts, and, how much has this grown in comparison to that? And now, again, that's where you have to be careful, because if you're undergoing an attack at the time that you initially create your baseline, why then you could inadvertently create your baseline in such a way that that slow-based kind of attack flies underneath the radar. But that's where the context of your anomaly detection becomes really important. Am I looking at this system-wide, or am I making it more granular? And there's there's risks and benefits to making your context more granular, as well as broader. You have to look carefully at it, I guess, is the best I can say. Let's see here. Jeff says, can Event Tracker ban or block IP addresses from accessing the network after a certain number of failed logon attempts from that IP address? Or can it see if a remote user successfully logged on, I should say.
Yeah, well, we've got several ways we can handle those. You may want to trigger an alert. If we see X number of log-on failures from any given IP address within a short time window, and then when that triggers, send me an email alert. But then also kick off one of our remediation actions that will go out and do whatever you may need it to do. We've got some predefined remediation actions. You can go in and you can create your own remediation action. So if you want to pull that PC off the network, or if you want to go block a port, you want to update a firewall rule, you can do those type of things.
All right. Now I love this question from Christy. She says, what combination of event IDs do you use for addition of devices to the network, that is, of joining workstations or servers to AD? She says she hasn't been able to get a definitive answer yet. All right. So Christy, I'm going to give you the answer in terms of Windows and AD, and then I'm going to make it a little more broad, and then Isaac may chime in on how he would be to catch it with Event Tracker. Number one, if you want to know when a new computer joins an Active Directory domain, it's really simple. Just search on the new computer event, which, let's see here, if Isaac doesn't already have it memorized.
2003 645, Windows 2008 or the Vista or newer, it's 4771 for computer added.
Yeah, and I'm looking here at my Security Log Encyclopedia. You're absolutely right. Event 645, and then just to repeat that, 4741. That's how you detect a new computer in Active Directory. But Christy, what if somebody just plugs in a computer to your network, or brings any other kind of device online on the network? If you're capturing, your router logs, your DHCP logs, if you're capturing, logs from your Windows servers, you're going to see that new IP address show up, or new device name show up. And I think one of the really neat things that Isaac and company have done is, you basically have taught Event Tracker to recognize IP addresses from events from all kinds of devices, right? And so,
that's correct.
So basically, if an IP address shows up in any kind of log, whether it's a syslog from Unix, or a router log, or a firewall log, Windows security log, you're going to recognize that IP address. And can you compare that against the known list and say, hey, this is something new?
Yes, you can pick up that it is new. If it's an IP that hadn't been used. Now, if it's in your DHCP range and it's one that's been cycled through, you may have seen it before. Now, what's nice is you have the learning period, and if that IP address hasn't been used in, say, the last 15, 20 days, and all of a sudden it pops up, then it'll flag as out of the ordinary because its baseline will be back down at 0. So there are ways of detecting those things.
Oh, now that's interesting. Folks, I hope you got that, because I was thinking, oh yeah, if it's within your DHCP range, it's useless. But most computers, if they stay plugged in longer than their lease, they're going to keep that same DHCP address for a long time, right? So that's kind of the factor that you're speaking from there, right, Isaac?
Correct, and that's with the event tracker, with the behavior analysis, it's a 7-day learning curve, and it's a moving average. So, as every day goes on, that 7 days, it's sliding with me. So if I stop using an application or I stop using a machine, and then all of a sudden it comes back to life, then if it's gone outside my 7 days, then I'm going to flag it as out of the ordinary.
So, folks, that brings up another really important point, and that is, how long is your baseline? You don't want it to be too short, but you don't want it to be too long either. If it's too long, then you're not going to see the stuff that we were just talking about here. Interesting point. Okay. Next question from Greg, maybe a little off topic, but we'll go ahead and ask it. Does Event Tracker have daily PCI compliance reporting?
Yes, we do. Underneath our compliance section, we've got reports out there that you can run on a daily, weekly basis. You can run them on demand for not only PCI, but your Sarbanes-Oxley, your HIPAAs, your GLBAs, FISMA, whatever else alphabet soup you want to throw out there. We've got reports for.
Gotcha. So Robert was saying, in the different scenarios that we're looking at, which logs are you monitoring? Just the security logs, system logs, or what? I suppose that would particularly apply to system events, system activity.
We're monitoring, of course, on your 2003 and older OSs, your standard 3, your application, your security, your system. On the Vista and newer, we will go out, we will grab all those multitude of other logs as well. I'm also monitoring here in our environment some Linux machines. I'm monitoring my firewalls. I'm also monitoring some FTP logs, monitoring some IAS and some Apache logs as well.
Now, but with the behavioral analysis, was that looking at just the security log or all the logs?
It's looking at all the logs.
Okay. Let's see here. Dan asks, does Event Tracker take into account for similarly named EXEs? He says, I know that Windows can detect the hash of an EXE when run, but is it accounted for in this scenario? Would malware named xl.exe be detected? So here we're just looking at what the log does, and the log tells us the name of the executable. It doesn't give us a hash. Now, if the Windows security log gave us the hash of the program when it was run, that would be pretty nice. Hey, Isaac, we could even take it further, but that's a limitation of Windows itself.
That's correct, and that would be great if Microsoft would give us the hash. And because some of those limitations, that's where our change audit piece will come in, because we can actually go in it and tell it, I want you to not only track the details of the file, such as the date it was created, modified, the size, but also we want you to monitor the hash. And if any of those items change, then the change audit piece of the Event Tracker will pick that up and then notify me. I can run reports on it, have alerts, things of that nature as well.
Great. And Timothy says, what about detecting new MAC addresses for a device attached to the network? So I guess that would all depend on if you've got logs that are recording MAC addresses. I suppose if they had a packet analyzer that was sending its logs to Event Tracker, you could detect anytime you see a new MAC address, eh?
That's correct. Yeah, if you have a script that you've got that automatically does that for you, and you want to pipe the output to Event Tracker, you can do that. You want to put it into a flat file and have us absorb it, we can do that as well.
like Snort. I mean, do you have anything built up to get stuff from Snort?
Yes, we take the Snort feeds. We've got quite a few reports that you can run and alerts that you can detect things through Snort.
Okay, cool. Greg says, wow, I guess he likes that point, and that is pretty cool. So, it's been an interesting discussion. And Isaac and the rest of Prism are the ones that really brought this to me, anomaly detection. I had kind of written it off in times past, but through a few simple methods, like what is new that we've never seen before, or what is suddenly much higher than what it normally is, we can pick out some pretty interesting conditions on our network, figure out if they're security related, and come back and do something about them if we need to. So you really made that possible, Isaac, not just in terms of making the webinar possible through your sponsorship, but also through being able to give us a log management solution that can actually demonstrate the scenarios that we talked about today. So thank you on both counts.
All right, you're welcome, and thank you, Randy, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Indeed. Thanks, everybody, for your time today, and we'll be sending out a follow-up, and you'll be able to get the slides, a recording of this event, and so on. So thanks a lot, everybody, and have a great day.